Live. So you need a motion to open the meeting.
If we have a motion to open the interim March Budget Advisory Committee meeting.
I make a motion to open the meeting.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are we comfortable with a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting, or do you guys want to take a final look at the final change that Glenn circulated? Make a motion to approve?
I'll move them.
I
Second.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
By the way, thanks for the help, Charles.
Oh, I didn't do much with the minutes, but others did, so appreciate it. Thank you, Glenn.
Who's up for tonight for taking the minutes? Whose turn is it?
I think everyone here, John, right, who's coming? John Campbell, right?
Yeah, he hasn't joined yet.
Yeah, I think he's the only one. Ellen, you did it, Ed did it, I did it, Glenn did it, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we have to go back to me. We're going through the rotation now.
Okay, then John gets it twice.
I guess, I mean, that's the only thing that's fair.
Second start of the new season, Len.
Yeah. Somehow that came around pretty quick.
Well, we had this extra meeting, Len.
Oh,
otherwise
yeah,
you would have
that's
been a month. You would have had till April.
Point. So we have a working document. So per tonight's agenda to approve for distribution, the document either as it stands or if there's any additional changes or additions that anybody wants to make. And then in addition to that, then what would be the plan for actually the distribution itself, and then it being referenced and utilized at the remaining work sessions and as a tool to get to a draft and final budget.
If I could say something, Charles, can I?
Please.
I want to just note something. Ed sent me an email a couple of days ago indicating an email from Charles, which had a series of questions related to the capital budget. When I first saw that, I did not think it would be it was Charles's comment on a document, the document that I was putting together. Ed, I want to thank you because I did check with Charles and he indicated, yes, he would like those points part of the document. And in order to get his concurrence, I prepared something, a small section with his points in the document. I don't know if you could show the document with those points in it, Charles.
Sure. Can you guys see the document pulled up on my screen?
No.
No.
No. Okay, let's.
We see, all we see is a budget committee agenda.
Got it. Okay.
It wasn't sent to the it wasn't sent to Sally or any of those folks. I could see the document now, a document. So you have to scroll. It's almost, yeah, there it is. So that section number 7 was inserted, putting in what Charles wrote in his email. In essence, I made some editorial changes, I think, if Charles is okay with that. But also the last bullet, the one in bold that's underlined, I suggested that we discuss the capital budget on the 24th and not just April 13th as currently planned. I think, and I'm recommending that in part because of Charles's suggestion, which I think is was good, constructive. And secondly, is we still have those questions above that are highlighted in yellow. And because I think we all better understand, we all should understand, excuse me, I'm better is a poor choice of words, but we all should understand what the underlying assumptions going in next year are. I mean, how big is the budget expected to be? How does it compare with the 5-year plan that Ellen put together based on all the submissions? So I think taking a few minutes to wrap our heads around what's expected when the budget is discussed on April 13th, I think would be constructive. So I'll stop there. I don't know if you have any comments on what I added or what I put in here, Charles, based on your email.
I think you encapsulated my questions, made good edits to make it presentable live, and I will likely be able to attend next Wednesday. I have had difficulty doing so because of work conflicts, but I'm carving that out for next Wednesday. I imagine we'll have representation from a number of other people from the group. Have you guys coordinated with the 15-minute allocation that we have? How to use that time and who's going to present? Because it is a limited window and there's a lot of ground to cover. And I guess another strategic question would be, if we are limited to 15 minutes with both questions and responses, that's going to really get eaten up very quickly. So is the strategy, and have you guys typically tried to present all of the questions and comments and then opened it back up to the board for feedback?
We haven't coordinated anything, but I don't think the Board of Trustees is necessarily holding us to 15 minutes. They're holding us to the end, but they haven't stopped anybody from asking any questions.
I think as I recall, we said that we would send this document or whatever's approved by the committee to the trustees like right away, because they needed a week, trustees plus Jerry, plus Augie, plus Dan. We would send that to them as soon as we approved it, so they would have a week or so to read it. I don't know if Dan Natchez, if you think the conduct of this meeting will be any different next week, because it was really done at various people's insistence to talk about revenue. And I think we had discussed expanding that slightly to, having us have some input on the total budget. So I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I'm hoping that we will be more inclusive than just revenue. And there are people who are desirous of doing it that way. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
On the subject of revenue, did everybody, was anybody able to see the update and the additions to revenue that they put into the budget in order to have it with a $600,000 deficit? That was a supplemental that was sent with the updated expense and revenue reports that we got last week. We've added $50,000 to the beach, so our beach revenue is $150,000. We've added $23,000 to the beach parking, $26,000 for kayak launching, $40,000 for tennis at Florence Park. They added about $195,000 worth of revenues to the budget that we already thought was very tight.
We already thought was optimistic.
So leading up to both the 24th and to answer your question, I have not, Glenn, and related to that is leading up to the 24th for the capital budget, and then, you know, a culmination on the 13th. I think we have had a lot of information shared with us on the operating budget side. It sounds like there's more to look at and potentially integrate into our analysis, which we should probably talk about. To just close off the capital budget discussion with that coming on the 24th, Dan, I don't know if you know whether the board and Jerry, Augie are preparing to distribute, you know, a draft preliminary capital budget or working document prior to the 24th, or will the 24th be utilized to present it?
Not sure we're going to get the capital budget on the 24th.
We're going to get the capital budget on the 24th.
I said I do not know if we're going to get it on the 24th.
Oh, okay. So it could even be coming later than the 24th.
I would suspect it would be, just based upon emails on other subjects and Jerry not having time to be able to take care of all the various things. And so we'd asked for more time. That's why we switched it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why the capital is actually on the April 13th.
So if I could make a suggestion, my suggestion is that you pursue on a much broader basis the issues before us, as opposed to necessarily getting into the weeds on, on specifics. I think, you can, for instance, Glenn, you just went through the 192,000 that have been added. I think that that's a good way of summarizing it and saying this may be difficult to do, and those are, decisions that have to be made. But even with that, the question is, how tight is the budget, et cetera. And here are some of the things that need to be done. Nothing has been prioritized except by individuals who believe something should be in ahead of else. And I think, that bothers me, because your recommendation of prioritization has been in front of everybody for months. I think that is exceedingly important to rank. And then, I'm not saying that anything is wrong or anything is shouldn't be done, but the question is, if we have to decide we can't do something, we should be saying what we have to do and work down to what we would like to do.
Yeah, and that's critical and that was really a very early component of one of our documents, the capital budget document, and it was something that you had shared at the state level down, and we incorporated it into the document.
I'm sorry.
Charles, to answer one of your questions, I sent an email. The document we got from Augie on the capital expenditures were only expenditures for this year. If you want to see the spending on the projects, if you go to the trustees meeting on January 12th and you look at the financial audit report, pages 72 to 74, it sums up all the projects and the amount of spending to date as of May 31st. And then the document that Augie gave us covers us only for this year. So you actually would see the spending to date as of May 31st, and then it's plus Augie's document. I also have a bunch of the closeouts because I got the last 3 years of bonding and what was closed out. and you would have to go back to the 5-year plan to see what they didn't do this year. I know that they were looking to start the rehab of the firehouse, $500,000. That wasn't started. They're supposed to be redoing a window project at Village Hall, $300,000. That wasn't started. They didn't do a whole lot of projects on that capital list that were supposed to start this year.
Well, again, in all of the meetings that we have had to date, I will tell you that the board is not thinking in terms of priorities, whether it be for capital or for operating. Nothing has surfaced in terms of that discussion. And why I've tried to move it that way, we haven't gotten that far.
Yeah. So, if we could just go through a couple of things that were just brought to light. One, at the maybe the very top level, is just trying to understand our timing and schedule with respect to the forthcoming deadline. I was trying to find the latest, meeting schedule, and Glenn, are you saying that the 24th has been pushed to the 13th?
Yeah, they switched it because we wanted to talk about the revenues, and they moved the discussion of the revenue up to the revenues and expenses to the 24th, and they moved the capital budget to the 13th because Jerry's been busy with different projects and such, and he wasn't even close to having a list ready, and felt he needed until that April date to put together a capital budget.
Okay, has that been published and circulated? I was looking here and didn't see it. It has. Okay.
No. The 22 capital budget has not been.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the dates and.
Yeah, I was. Sorry. Yes.
No.
Do you know where the dates can be found on the website?
They're posted. I know that because I asked them to be posted and I was told they were posted. I just don't know where. But I'll look for it while we're talking.
Could you do me a favor? Sure. It has the glass up on this whole thing to be put down.
So this stops here.
For this extra meat, you're going to give your leftovers much meat.
Okay, so they've been posted, and did we know? Did any of you other than Glenn know about this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry.
Yes.
I missed that. Okay. So it's the capital budget is on the 13th. Revenue is on the 24th, and then that's it with what's left.
No. What was originally scheduled for the 13th, which was revenues and expenses. In other words, the 13th was, at least as I understand it, a look at both sides of the equation, revenue and expenses. There's been a lot of discussion on revenue because to many of us, it appears overly optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two is on the 24th was the capital budget, water fund, and sewer fund, of which the capital budget is the largest component. And what we did, Charles, as Glenn said, was just flip those dates, because many of us felt discussing the big picture or issues around the budget was important to have that done soon, because the budget was going to be adopted or is going to be adopted on the 26th. So, and that would be the last budget meeting on April 13th. So we agreed we would send this document or some version of it to the board as a basis for our conversation on the 24th, next Wednesday. And I only just suggested, just my thinking based on your email, is that we have a conversation. We don't have to we have we'll call it a high level conversation on the capital budget about answering the questions that you raised, plus some other related points, which we could go into if you want. But that's the whole objective here, is to try to elevate, as Dan was representing, the discussion on the budget to here's the big picture, here's some of the questions or points, some of the omitted expenses and where we're how we're depending on a growth in non-property tax revenue and so on in order to balance the budgets. So that's the kind of conversation we expect to have, at least as I understood it, on the next Wednesday.
So we'd be following up a revenue and expense conversation with a preemptive follow-up on this section of the document for the capital budget, which would give us until the 13th to, take the feedback that we get on the 24th and work with it. And then we don't know when a document will be distributed between the 24th and the 13th with respect to the capital budget itself.
That's correct, yeah. And I think we wanted the 24th. Originally, Dan wanted tonight, I think, to have this conversation, but
yeah, well, that's such as life.
Yes, we agreed on the 24th because there's only one budget meeting after the 24th before it's done. So in order to have any input, that's, we felt that something had to be prepared and shared with the trustees before the final decisions are made.
Can we go back to the capital section of this document? Do we want to include in there a question about how capital spending is determined? To go back to the point of how are you prioritizing?
Now, this Friday, they've announced that they're going to be releasing the tentative budget. I don't know if that would have any of the capital as a supplement to that.
Can't tell you.
Well, typically it does.
But the other question I have, which has to do with the capital budget, going back and looking at the history of spending in the village, normal circumstances is we would, we would be doing capital spending and we would bond a certain amount of it, but we'd also pay for a certain amount of it out of general fund surplus. There is not going to be any general funds surplus. We're looking at from the last meeting, we were looking at them taking $600,000 out of the general budget. They still had two positions that they hadn't put into the budget, which was another $200,000. It doesn't include adopting any of the police reforms, which is about another $200,000. And then it doesn't have any raise for senior staff, and it doesn't have any raises for the new contract with the police officers within the budget.
And
so you're actually looking at, even with the adjusted income that they put in there, you're looking at $1 million deficit going into the year. And there's no accommodation outside, we're going to bond it for any capital spending.
And in addition to what you just rattled off, you've also brought up at every meeting that overtime is being cut way too low.
They're actually over on some of the overtime budgets this year, and either they're keeping them the same or cutting them and saying, don't worry about it. Somehow it's all about coronavirus and we're going to be that much efficient this year.
Yeah, I know. And I agree with you that it's too low.
Yeah.
So we'll do, if the plan is to distribute this document shortly after this meeting, it will give the board a week to digest it, and then we can reference some of these questions on the 24th, and then maybe we clarify to ourselves internally and then communicate to the board that with a 3-week window between the 24th and the 13th, depending particularly upon when we see a preliminary capital budget document, that to anticipate that we would be providing additional feedback and dialogue and questions in that 3-week window to work with. Because 3 weeks is a long time in the context of going into the 24th, probably just having looked at, or potentially not having even yet looked at, the capital budget, and having those 3 weeks in play, that we utilize them, but that we communicate that's our plan, and that we're all on the same page, that'll be used actively.
Yeah, but Charles, that assumes we're gonna get it.
And it assumes that we're going to get it.
Yeah. And is what they're going to present to us a new 5-year plan? An updated 5-year plan? Because I know that you feel the priority with the sidewalks. I don't think that they were planned to be started until 22, 23.
And I just want, I want to digress for a second, just as an example, that I went kind of rogue with that for a variety of reasons. And I generally don't think that's a good idea. And I wanted to put that out there maybe as an example, that as passionate as I am about that topic.
Really?
Probably for obvious reasons and some not so obvious. That maybe going forward, we as a group, get our questions together and communicate them, as a committee. I probably should have done that as a, independent of the committee. I thought it was important to use what I did as an example, probably of what not to do going forward. And I just wanted to put that out there.
Well,
But it did raise an important subject, because the Safe Streets has been on the agenda for months, and I think you might have kickstarted it. But again, it comes down to the fact that you have large capital projects, and then you have four tire projects. And the large capital projects is what you need to bond. Whether it's a new Village Hall, whether it's paving Halsted Avenue, which is, I believe, 3.5 million they're looking at, Dan?
the new Village Hall is $20 million.
Yeah, but I'm saying the paving on Halsted Avenue.
Again?
Right, that was the $3 million number, and in driving down Halsted Avenue,
Halsted is $3 million.
right, I'm curious why that's critical, but they were going to
Well,
talk.
here's my problem. Okay, I don't have a problem with what you did going rogue. What bothered me about your going rogue was you did not prioritize it. You emotionalized it, but you did not hit the issues of the prioritization that the committee has recommended to the board.
Well, safety being arguably above law. Arguably, which
And safety was one of our priorities.
No, yeah, but it was. But my concern is, if people want to do it, we need to argue it in terms of the priorities. In terms of safety, in terms of whatever. I mean, there's a whole ranking that needs to be done, and they should be ranked that way.
Yep.
And if we don't rank them, then it's just who can carry the day through either emotion or persuasion or bullying.
Right, and you shared that state document, which I believe we incorporated into our capital budget
Yep.
framework.
Yep.
And then within the context of these things like safety and law, then there's also priorities within that. I just happened to also be included on an email distribution and saw that road paving was being moved forward with, and interjected in response to an email that I happened to be on.
But my concern, Charles, is not that, Halsted is being put for, everything's being put forward without any prioritization ranking. Everything.
And what is the process? Because there was
There
a
is no
comment
process.
that was
That's
right,
what the
exactly.
committee is trying to create. And
Right.
And that's why I suggested a few minutes ago in that capital section, should we include a question, how are capital projects prioritized?
I would do it in both sections, the capital budget as well as the operating budget,
Okay,
because we do the same thing. We add people, we add programs without thinking in terms of anything except that program, but not in context to the overall budget. And most governmental entities that are really into budgeting require rigorous prioritization. Not that it always carries the day, but it makes people stop and either think or have to justify. We go by emotion, this sounds like a great thing, let's do it. As opposed to, okay, if we do that, what is it bumping, or do we just do everything? Which is, I don't know of anything that has been deferred other than potentially the new village hall. And the
And look,
board
I
has,
mean,
and the board has not deferred that. The manager has just simply said, we're not doing it.
And we can take it.
Wait for it to fall apart.
We can take it as a case study, but that dialogue that emerged, there was a response that, Tony was promised this street, and with these departmental worksheets that are being circulated and worked with, to your point, Dan, that is it clear to department heads that at the top of the worksheet should be the excerpt from our document and the state derived from a state document that is showing what the hierarchy is in determining priorities, because that's
Exactly, and that's what we need to try and get the board and staff to think in terms of, or there's no point in doing anything we're doing, in my opinion.
The other problem is, when back in the good old days when we were getting hit with all the lawsuits and had to pay millions and millions out of our pockets, a lot of items were deferred. So now you have numerous items that are on the top of the list, and all of them are saying we need to prioritize it. And that's what happens when you don't continue to do your maintenance and spend your money on the capital budget. On the side, I'll give you a very funny story. When I was first on the budget committee, I actually asked for a quarterly report, and literally Village Hall was turned upside down. Why do I need this information? And then it was basically informed to me that it would take the village about 3 months to get me that information, because they were dealing with sloppy disks and cobalt, and it just came up that our computer systems were completely out of date. In fact, the police were jealous because the sanitation department had a computer with a cow on the side of the box. And that actually led to a huge amount of update of our computers and softwares about 10 years ago, any place from the police department to Village Hall and everything. But literally, they were still using the floppy disks in order to try to generate reports, and they couldn't do it in any kind of fashion. because all they did was push it off, push it off, push it off. And that's what you're seeing with some of these projects. They were supposed to do Village Hall 20 years ago. And the fact that it's even on the agenda, not that it's going to actually get done. And that's what, how is this going to get done, and how is it going to be paid for?
And how is it going to get done in the next, not it meaning town hall, but Village Hall, but how is it, to Ellen's point, meaning putting that at the top of section 7, how is that it going to get done in the next 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Because again, I'm using it as an example because I believe in it, but it's a damn good one, is that if Halstead Avenue is paved over walking studies determining that children's lives are at risk, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that decision, unless there is an RFP, and we've actually moved forward with a contractor, which I would still argue there's leverage with, this needs to be revisited. And it's a glaring, perfect example of how the process, in my opinion, failed at the expense of something very important to all of us. So
the other issue I had, Charles, with all of that, why are we spending money doing studies if we're not gonna be able to respond to the results?
Well, the other question is,
Absolutely.
you're at an interest rate of 1%. Why can't both projects be done?
great point.
Why, what's the difference between $3 million and $5 million when you're talking about 1.5% interest?
And the timing of this information being circulated is important because we're once again running out of time. I mean, we did, I think, a lot better with the operating budget this year, getting information in advance, really being able to work with it. But, I understand that it's challenging, but we're down to the wire again here. And these 3 weeks are a critical window to be able to work with. So the document gets distributed. Hopefully we get answers to a lot of these questions because it would help us to understand the mechanics. And then again, if at the top of the list in this section is the process for prioritization and really trying to adhere to that, to have an opportunity to then have what were identified as the priorities evaluated, I think is important. We can be objective in doing that by looking at the list within our framework and answering the question whether it checks these boxes.
When I was putting the capital budget together last year, all the department heads put everything as priority number 1 in terms of importance to them. There was no logical thought process.
Okay, so I think you're clear on where you're going. I just don't want to have everybody focused on this for the rest of the meeting. In answer to what the schedule is, I just sent an email out to Robert and Sally because the posting on the website is wrong, but it includes the updated schedule, so you all now have it.
Yep.
Okay.
Where Glenn was going to,
I think we need to get back to, if you want, to Len's document, and if you incorporate whatever you want to incorporate, but I think you want to incorporate the prioritization both in the operating and capital budget sections. That's just a suggestion. It's up to you. This is your meeting.
I think that makes sense. And to Glenn, with an example with revenue having changed, what are your feelings about whether to let these numbers stand as they are? Because it's probably going to be dynamic. Or are there any things with respect to numbers that you want to change, or we're running with this sort of as of a given date?
I would suggest, Charles, from a number point of view, we go with this. I don't think we're not at a materiality level. There's clearly still lots of balls in the air and lots of questions that we still have. I guess I'm obsessed with the fact that timing is important for us to get this out. I'm very skeptical, quite frankly, that we'll get responses to our questions. But that said, I think it's important. I hope I'm wrong, believe me. But that said, I think it's important that we be prepared as to how we're going to provide input at the meeting next Wednesday, how we're going to choreograph that. And so we provide some meaningful input to the budget process. That's my big concern.
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure how much our input is being listened to or valued.
I don't know who's talking in the background, but it's very hard to hear everybody. Thank you. Go ahead, Ellen.
No, I was just saying, I don't know how much our input is being listened to, digested, or even valued. We're submitting
I think you
recommendations.
have
they
to
don't like-
assume that it is being listened to and keep moving as if it is,
Okay,
because otherwise I sort of liken this to the Nixon Kennedy, it's not a question what the question is, it's what the answer is.
okay.
So, try and, move forward. But there is one other thing, Len, that came up today that I didn't have a chance to talk to you about. But you may want to consider putting in. There is allegedly going to be COVID funding from the, bill that was just passed that will trickle down to the village. Whether it's $500,000 or $2 million, it doesn't, whatever we get, we get. But the question is, when you receive a gift, if you will, people tend to spend it quickly. And I would suggest that you may want to put a plank in here that to the extent that the village receives unexpected revenue as a one-time issue,
Yeah.
that it should not be spent on operating activities.
Yeah, scroll up, Charles, because we did have a line, but we didn't, if you, let's see, where is that? I think it's, yeah, there it is. Point 1 on on that page. That's all, but I think you raised a fair point, Dan. Adding.
I've already heard people talking about how we are going to use that money. And I can tell you it has nothing to do with priority.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with capital expenditures. It has to do with, oh, we can hire this people, we can do this, we can do all sorts of operating things with it.
Yeah.
The problem with that is it's a one-shot deal. So what do you do next year?
Yep.
So you may want to massage one to expand that a little with an additional sentence that might
Yeah.
be meaningful.
Well, do we want to recommend that it go back into the general fund? Since we've been using money from there?
The problem is taking from the general fund for the operating fund. So I think you can say it should be used either in the general fund for replenishment or for capital, projects, but it should not be for operating. I think you have to have a negative as well as a positive statement.
Right, and I did mean as replenishment, not to, just be able to grab whenever you wanted.
Well, I will tell you that some on the board that don't understand the word replenishment.
Gotcha.
Yeah, can we look
And
at this?
that's a matter of, how people look at things, which is fine. Everybody's entitled to look at things their own way. I respect that. I just happen to have a different approach, that's all.
This deficit this year, the negative $1.7 million, if that trends in that ballpark.
No, the latest from Augie is he says he is going to end up the year with a $500,000 surplus.
Right.
But we do not know how we got from the 500,000 surplus from the, $1.7 million deficit.
That's just based on the report that we got from Augie, I guess sometime in maybe mid-February.
I understand, Len.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's
I
a
understand.
moving target, and it doesn't matter what the actual numbers are.
Yeah.
It's the trend that so if you're going to have a wide, what I'll call mood swing, you need to understand it.
And again, that number does not include any monies that might be used to pay for any capital project.
So I sent to you tonight, which I don't know if I'd sent it before, but I just found it in my emails that I had not dealt with. What I'd asked for was the 5-year projection of capital projects from the water fund and from the sewer fund. So you now have that information. That's based upon what has already been approved, not what is coming up. So I think, Len, your point of, how to present this is something that you all need to figure out tonight, now.
Yes.
And I think the 15 minutes is not a hard and fast rule. It depends on how fast you get to it. They like to stop at 7 o'clock. So the meeting's advertised from 5 to 7. If, they get done with all of their questions by 6 o'clock, that's an hour. If they got done at 6:45, that's 15 minutes. If it's, 6:55, I'm not sure you get 15 minutes. It all depends on, how everybody is reacting at this point. So I would try and get to a meaningful approach people can focus on quickly, try and stay out of the weeds and see where it goes.
Yeah, well, I agree. Having been in the situations where often we're said, I bet anyone here could present the key points in 5 minutes. Revenues are non-property tax revenues are too optimistic. Too many expenses, both personnel and non-personnel, are not included. Okay, no priorities are set for programs on both the operating and capital side. We're relying much too heavily on the growth in non-property tax revenue to keep property taxes low and fund increased costs. What about labor expenses that are continuing to grow at a rate higher than revenue? Those are the 5 points. So that's that. So we can clearly make the point. I wouldn't spend a lot of time in a lot of the stuff that's here. And if given the time, yes, you dig into the capital budget or the expense budget questions that we had, but we can make our points, I believe, within the 15-minute time frame, as long as they're, as you say, Dan, clear and concise.
Len, I have one more point that maybe the trustees will get it. With the way that this budget is being presented, can somebody explain to me how we're going to get out of deficit spending in the next 5 years? What is going to change from what we're being presented this year that is going to significantly changed the formula that we are somehow gonna get out of deficit spending in the next 5 years.
And Glenn, my only reaction to what you say is, I don't think we ought to ask them the questions. I think we ought to say, I would take your point and say, we've been, now, there's a lot of counter here because our reserves have grown year after year after year. But you could say, you know, we're in a position where we're spending down our reserves. That must stop. And reserves must remain consistent with the policy established by the village. The 30% of annual expenditures, I think, was the
Did they ever approve that, or was that
I
just?
thought they did. I hear
Yeah,
that.
there was a resolution, that was approved.
Okay, thank you.
And right
There's a
now,
resolution on the website.
the reserves are higher than the 30%, I believe. So it's over 12 million.
I think the reserves were like at 12.5. So they're right on the borderline of that 30%.
But anyway, so my only point was, you know, I would suggest that we make our points, and then if there's a window, we get to the questions. But that's just my,
I think that makes a lot of sense, but I would also like to suggest you may want to take one or two examples as you make those points.
sure.
Simply to dramatize the issue, not, you know, say, I'm just suggesting these are the types of things of how prioritization could help.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I didn't take 5 minutes in what I said anyway.
No, but I understand that, but
I had plenty of time left over then.
Charles,
Yes.
you're gonna have to remember your
plan to be
audience.
at on the 24th.
Excuse me?
Do you plan to be present on the 24th?
Yes.
So maybe the best way to do this is everybody just have their thoughts about what should be in the presentation, and you could put it into bullet points, and you could do the 5 minutes presentation for the committee.
Well, we don't know if it's 5 minutes. I just did that as somewhat tongue in cheek.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. If
Yeah.
you know, we can go off on tangents, but if Charles actually does, look, this is what we think the main points are, bing, 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 and do it as a united front, we're probably better off as a group.
And I agree. I think that's a great idea that Charles, get Charles and have him make the points. And we'll allow him a half an hour to do the sidewalks. So
But just remember, your audience has not the depth or the review that you have all done. Okay? It just needs to be clear and concise, you know, with, you know, sort of like what you just did, Glenn. That people can understand that much better than in a, you know, what we do now is we go through it line by line. Nobody can understand what we're doing, you know, line by line.
yeah.
You know, we're not looking at saying, well, what does this all really mean? You know, and why are we doing that? You know, what's the direction we need to do, and what, you know, how do we control overtime, and how do we budget, and how do we need to think about restructuring, et cetera.
Well, what is Plan B if we have a rainy or a cool summer? When all of a sudden your revenues are all based on the rec department. What happens if it rains 14 days during the summer, or it's a cool summer or it's a hot summer, and your beach revenues go in half?
Yeah, and perhaps I forgot perhaps the most important assumption that we have here, which is, as we point out on the first page, which is the village is assuming that under point 2 there, that the economy is going to be strong, sales tax revenue is up, and everything will be normal. We're going to have a gangbuster summer and the summer camps and so on. beginning in June, everything is going to be wonderful. Back to normal. So that's,
Glenn, I just wouldn't say back to normal. I would say near normal, because for instance, they would tell you that's not true. The camp is only operating at, limited capacity.
oh, is that true?
Yes,
But revenue,
but they're still doing the revenue from the limited capacity, to
yes.
cover their expenses. The issue becomes, what happens if the US turns out to have a problem of spiking in lockdown that's happening in the rest of the world because they all opened up too quickly?
Right, right.
And I think that is the issue that is the major one, which I will tell you was not given much thought at our last meeting. Because I raised it and everybody just didn't want to hear it. And I understand, didn't want to
Just
say it.
looking at the railroad parking budget, they're assuming people are back in the city.
They're assuming that people are back in the city, and they're assuming that they are now renting part of that, those lots to automobile dealers.
They actually released a report a few days ago. 20% are not planning to go back to the city, and 66% of the businesses are looking to have employees working from home, reduced work weeks of people actually going to the city. Majority of the businesses at this point are actually looking to have a majority of their employees working from home, the office workers.
I thought Jerry was was in agreement that was a little optimistic, and that's why he was looking to rent some of the parking spaces.
Yeah, he's renting some of the parking spaces to a car dealership.
Right, you're there.
Can I make a suggestion? And I think in terms of utility and mechanics, would it not make sense for us to very succinctly present this at the beginning of this meeting, which is going to be focusing on revenue and expenses, so that our thoughts can be shared? And if there are questions that the board has with respect to any of these items, before you open up a 2-hour conversation to unpack it, that members of our committee might be able to provide feedback, versus a lot of this may end up being covered over the 2 hours. And then we're coming in at the end with 15 minutes or whatever, however much time, and then having to decide what's already been covered, what's relevant, et cetera. It's just the utility of it seems like it would make a lot more sense. I know that's probably not going to be well received as a suggestion, but it just seems like it kind of makes sense.
Dan would have to ask if that's possible, and then have you, again, representing the committee, and ask for maybe 10 minutes, maybe at the most 10 minutes, to make our points and go from there. They might be in tune to accept that, but Dan would have to get a feel for the rest of the trustees. I think that Nora and Victor might go along with it, but again, it says it's united front. It's simply gonna be the chairman of the budget committee would like to just make an overall statement, the feel of the committee. It's not going to be longer than 10 minutes. Can we do it at the beginning of the meeting so it's relevant to the rest of the meeting, and leave it at that?
Essentially, it's a recap of the document that they will have already seen, and an opportunity if there were any questions that would be of use for us to address prior to tonight's discussion.
It may be helpful. I'm not sure. I'd like to know what Dan thinks, or anyone else. It may be helpful in your email when you send this to the board members and the staff, Charles, for you to suggest and say, it may be helpful if I, as chair, is given 10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to, quickly share or summarize our key points in the attached document, something like that.
Or even say 5 to 10 minutes. If they see the 5, they may, be easier on it.
Yeah.
And in fairness to what the plan for Wednesday probably is, if I were Augie, let's say, I might turn around and say, we're planning on addressing all of this, which may be the case, and that's great. And questions that people have, he may be planning on answering with what we've presented here. So I'm approaching it more from the perspective of, if the document has been read, and with somebody like Augie having an opportunity to respond maybe even in advance, that a lot of this is going to be addressed on Wednesday, that it could be maybe more focused on opening it up for any questions that would be of use to have answered prior to the 2-hour discussion.
So I'm not a burglar.
So my thought is, if you can finish this up tonight and send it tomorrow or Friday morning at the absolute latest, but preferably tomorrow, and make sure that it's copied to everybody so I can see it, and ask that if I could have a couple of minutes at the beginning to help explain a perspective that we hope that you all can focus on as you go through the meeting, or something like that.
So to make that ask in an email.
If you ask for 10 minutes, the answer will be no.
And does anybody have any, I don't know if you agree with that approach. I mean, there's advantages to doing it after you've listened also. It's really just a thought. I mean, but do you guys have an opinion, the rest of the group, on what would be, because it could also rub people the wrong way, and I don't want to do that, we're looking to jump in and take over from the beginning and all that good stuff, which is obviously not the case. But
no, I think it's a good idea, because at all the sessions that we've had, and bits and pieces of revenue have come up, it's basically whoever the department head is just going through, a lot of numbers. It's not a substantive conversation around the budget. This introduces, let's talk about what we're doing holistically.
Makes sense. Again, it's such a dynamic thing, but because of the optics, do we cut the document off for the Zoom on Wednesday with what I'm talking about and not get into the numbers down here?
I would leave the numbers in, Charles. I would not talk about, if say all I want is, to give a very quick overview of the document that we would focus on, that you may want to focus on as we go through this. And the worst that can happen is the answer is no.
Yeah, and then we could save it till the end. I mean, the optics of the -$1.7 million with distributing this document, I mean, that's all we have to work with right now. I mean, if Augie is contending that, or Jerry's contending that, if Augie is contending that we're going to be 500 in the plus, he did in an email, that can be explained. But this is what we have to go with right now. Are we in agreement? We're not going to try to.
Charles, the object is not to get into a battle of the numbers.
No, I understand. I'm talking about for distributing the document. I'm certainly not in next Wednesday going to go past summarizing bullets and opening things up for discussion. I'm not going to even show this screen, I don't think, on the Zoom next Wednesday. And I'm probably not going to be controlling the Zoom. So if they pull the document up, we'll stop at the text. But with respect to distributing the document,
So Charles, just in your email, you can include that these numbers were pulled together at a point in time. And, you know, we realize they've been changing regularly, so they may be slightly out of date.
perfect. Yep.
I mean, because they came from Augie. I agree with Dan. Let's not get hung up on this. We should send the documents with certain edits. Since I'm taking minutes, I've been noting some of the edits, which are very helpful. But I think, you know, Charles's role is to summarize our key points or highlights, you know, but it's not to spend a lot of time saying this number should be 100,000 lower or higher, or whatever the number is. That's not our role here at this point. We all understand, as it said very early in the document, that things are changing. Things are going to be changing. Right? That the, you know, further review of the budget by the board, blah, 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 remains to be done. And this stuff came from the clerk treasurer. Let's not get too hung up. That's where it came from. And we're just working with that now.
Agreed.
I think, you know, I think we can navigate that. And from bringing up on Zoom, I wouldn't even want to, we'll have sent this document. I don't think it's wise to show it in the meeting. If anything, I would show, you know, whatever the final bullet points are, Charles, you have the 5 or however many bullet points it is, and say, here are the key points. And then you talk through them one by one. And so, but we are prepared to dig deeper based upon what's in this document.
Mm-hmm.
I also suggest that we also include as an attachment after, you know, is the prioritization ranking, not the document, but just the ranking that they may want to consider.
For what?
For how you rank projects in order of priority.
You're saying on the capital side?
Well, I'm suggesting that that applies to the operating side as well. There's
I'm
nothing,
trying to think of what our well, life safety and so on, but
yeah. So it makes it easier for people to focus on a project. Does this meet that test or not? And it may fall on deaf ears. You know, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, but at least it's an approach that, you know, is meaningful. And I know it will resonate with some and it may not resonate with all. I can't tell you. But it's a suggestion. But this is your committee, so I've talked too much and I apologize.
yeah, I don't, yeah, I think we'd have to have very different criteria for the operating budget.
Okay. Then stay away from it.
An operating budget is a lot of stuff that, you know, it's just done every year. Like if you're talking about new things to add to the operating budget, it seems that the prioritization is important, but a lot of things they have to do every year.
No, I agree with you. My assumption was on what we are adding. And there's a lot being added.
Well, if you're talking about ads, I definitely agree that there has to be some sense of what's more important if, when we have a tight budget.
But maybe it's too much to bite in one, at one time, and maybe that's
Yeah.
what we work on for next year.
Charles, you showed that document now on the screen. You may have to get it to Sally to be ready for a foil.
Oh, yeah. That all sounds like a plan. Len, are you comfortable with having taken the minutes and incorporating a couple of the changes for distribution? We'll all take a look at it, and if everybody's in agreement with the changes, I'll send the email out. I'll send probably a draft to you guys if you'd like of the ask for the 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, or do you trust my judgment? I'll be very succinct. Attached is X.
I wouldn't add, I just asked for, a couple of minutes is how I would put it.
Mm-hmm. And then hopefully at the end of the meeting, we would have that window also to circle back and utilize that as well.
I agree, but if you ask for, 5 or 10 minutes, I have a feeling that it will be turned off because nobody sticks to 5 or 10 minutes. If it's 5 minutes, you go to 10 minutes. If it's 10 minutes, you go to 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to foreclose your being able to participate later on or get into a lengthy discussion unless the board wants to get into that.
It was one of the thoughts, because it's probably not fair to others if we open our document up for questions at the beginning.
I don't think you're opening it up to questions. I think what you're doing is saying, this is a perspective that the budget committee would hope that the board would take into consideration in tonight's discussion.
Exactly. That's perfectly said.
And leave it at that. I would be very general. I would not be pushy. I would try and give it it's a perspective type thing. They can adopt it or not adopt it and leave it like that. And, I found when that type of thing happens, most people don't react. We move on to go through the stuff and then go back to it later.
Alexa.
Dan, I had a question for you. I feel ethically obligated to bridge this. We don't know if we're in a $500,000 surplus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Given the amount of our budget, I feel fortunate that the budget committee is functioning. I understand that a lot of the committees are not, in an effort to save overtime expense to run Zoom calls.
All committees are functioning.
Fantastic. That was my question.
All committees are functioning. The trustee liaisons are taking are doing the meetings at night. Those that needed the staff are meeting during the business hours.
Great. That's fantastic. Thank you.
So, and those that are, there are a couple that are not meeting, but it has nothing to do with the budget issue, of not having staff available. They just aren't meeting, period, because they're sort of disorganized at the moment. Not as well organized. How about putting it that way?
Great.
They don't have as good a chairman as the budget committee does.
Now, Dan, at what point are we going to present the recommendation for a junket with the budget committee, Augie and the village manager to go to Las Vegas to see if the industrial area could support a casino? Is that still on the agenda?
That committee is not meeting at the moment, so that question would be out of order.
Glenn, they may send us to Atlantic City.
Even better. That's a cute place.
Yeah, we could ta-
Atlantic
if we
City
could
is
take-
just
if we
having
could-
everything knocked down, so I wouldn't necessarily want to suggest that.
Could we auction off the button when we blow up Village Hall to build a new one?
Okay, I think we need to stick to the agenda.
You know what I'll do, Charles, on that table with the negative 1.7 million, is I will add a note, like a big capital letter note at the bottom of that table saying, based on information from the, updated information from the clerk treasurer, it appears that, any shortfall for 2021 will be eliminated. Something like that without getting into specifics. Right below that.
Mhm. That's
saying,
cool.
Well, the numbers for the adjusted 20 is from, I'll make a note that'll explain the situation. So.
Numbers subject to updates with further information.
Right, something like that. That's, just so we're covered on that.
We know this, and it might be obvious. I don't know if this confuses it, because I don't know that people are going to get their head around it with this, but that this percent change 19 to 22 is a non-annualized number. That's a 3-year number. So
Well, I don't know where the non-annualized came from.
no, I just threw that in there.
Yeah, but it is an annual number because we were given the 2022 budget. So it's simply the change between 19 and 22. 19 is an actual, I concede that. 22 is a budget. 21 is a forecast, I guess. But we're expecting, the budget is what you expect to spend. And it's the same endpoint for all numbers. So it's a relative comparison, perhaps not an absolute, because we don't know what 22 actuals are going to be.
But the annualized percent change from 19 to 22 would be, less than 3%. Half of.
I'm not quite sure how you get that.
Maybe I just need clarification then. The percent change is the 8.4 is not an average per year. It's over that 3-year period.
Yes, exactly. It's 19
right.
to 22. It doesn't say average, right?
Right. So I mean, I'm clear. When people's eyes go to this, that it just being clear that if you were apples to apples for a 1-year number, it would be 8.4 divided by the 2019 to 22 period.
No, I think this is clear, because what this is saying is if you look at 2019, which was a normal year, and we're projecting 2022 to be normal, the change is 8.4%.
Well, it's actually worse because 2019 is normal and 2022 is modified normal.
Correct.
So the expenses would be higher if you went to a full normal.
No.
I'm not so sure.
No.
If you had another, not that we're going to do this, but if you had another column and you took the average from 2019 to 2022, is it?
I would leave it the way it is and not get it.
Is that the average percent change, or do we need to divide 8.4 divided by 3 years?
I don't think that will add anything to this.
I think what the mistake that we would be making is we're getting into the numbers as opposed to the trends.
But I need clarification then, because if I look at this, if this is a 3-year number at 8.4, right? We're saying that the revenue is percent change for 1 year is tripling. If you look at this quickly, it looks like if this is an average in 19 to 22, that they're almost the same. Those are two very different things. I believe that the intent with what this is communicating is that over a 3-year period, it's 8.4, which annualized would be, whatever, 8.4 divided by 3.
Well, I think, Charles, what that shows, at least what it showed me, is over the 3-year interval, revenue went up 8.4%. In one of those years, it went up 6.2. So in other words, the revenue increases in 1920 to 21 was very modest. So the point of this is that we're saying we're being very aggressive in terms of our revenue growth. So this, in one sense, demonstrates this, that we're expecting a large change in revenue based on the numbers, and we're expecting a large change in revenue and a very small change in expense. Because as you can see, over that 19 to 22 interval, expenses have grown a lot. And our argument is that, well, we've excluded a lot of expenses in the 22 budget. That's why it's so low. Presumably, we point that out. And we're saying that revenues are optimistic. So, if it's not clear to you, then we have to think of a better way to do it.
It's clear to me. I just want to make sure it's clear to others, if that makes sense, that it's clear that that's a 3-year number. It's clear to me that it's a 3-year number, but
I think it's clear.
These numbers are so close to each other that you could infer that this is an average over 19 to 22.
Or you could infer that between 2019 and 2022, our revenue only went up 2.2%, and we have a 6.2% jump in 1 year. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
That's what I got out of this chart.
As did I. I'm good. I mean, this is a 3-year period we're reflecting. I mean, it's pretty clear. I think non-annualized confuses things. Okay, cool.
And Charles, in answer to your question earlier, you asked if we trusted you to send the email without us reviewing the draft. I trust you.
Thank you.
I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but you have my vote.
Thanks, Ellen.
And if that's the case, I would suggest that you make a motion to authorize the chairman to send in the final version to the board of trustees. Or to
I make a motion that Charles can send the email with the revised document to the Board of Trustees.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bill, I see you're with us. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to the conversation, or you just kind of soaking it in?
I think I do not. I'm trying to catch up with you guys, having been absent for a large part of what precedes the meeting tonight. And one of these days I may be able to get back on board.
Well, we do welcome you back, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back. Hope all is well. And John Campbell joined us. John, did you have anything else, anything that you wanted to add?
No, I wish I did, but I don't.
Okay, anybody else have anything?
Yeah, Charles. Okay, what's the date by which everyone is going to get their key points? Or at least we all agreed we're going to send a bullet point or two that Charles should highlight in his presentation to the board, whether it's at the beginning or at the end. So when would you want those, Charles?
Well,
What
I guess
sort of,
a question would be, do we want to open up for additional bullets versus me really summarizing the bullets from within the document? And if anybody has anything that they think we would want to add as a bullet to do that before we distribute this, and that my summary would be limited as a follow-up to the document that's going to be distributed to the board. But if somebody has something else.
When would you tentatively have us, what your draft would be, and then just give us one day if we wanted any bullet point added?
Okay, I'll take the doc. We're gonna revise the document slightly, distribute that. I'm gonna then put a summary together of the bullets from within the document. I'll send that out, let's say by, let me just do the math here. Len, would you need like a couple of days to turn the document back around?
oh,
roughly?
no, I'll have it to you either late tonight or sometime early tomorrow.
Okay, that's great. And then I'll send that out tomorrow or Saturday.
I would suggest it has to be by Friday at the latest, Charles. Sending it over the weekend does not get to everybody. If we can send it tomorrow, it gets put in their package for, for the weekend.
Actually, tomorrow's Thursday. So yeah, if you had it back to me by the end of the day tomorrow, Len, we distribute it either tomorrow or Friday. I can summarize, into like Sunday evening. And then if anybody wants to add anything, you'd have, Monday, Tuesday to get back to me with, or Monday, let's say, to get back to me and the rest of the group for confirmation that we would want to include additional bullet points. But is there anything that anybody has that they anticipate right now that we want to incorporate into the document for distribution?
Not that, I think everything's been sort of discussed, and
Okay. So yeah,
Len is taking the notes.
Yep. And if anybody has anything subsequent to the document being distributed, if you could get it to me as soon as possible, I'll try have my summary out by, Sunday evening.
Yeah, just
if you guys could turn that around like on Monday with any comments on my bullets and any additional items, and then we can pull it together on Tuesday as a group.
yeah, just the one point that I had spoken about, and Len summarized fairly good to basically state that where the budget is and where we're going to get out of deficit spending over the next 5 years. Whatever time frame that you feel is appropriate.
Okay. Anybody have anything else?
Yes.
Yeah.
I promised I wouldn't say anything more, but we're not going to meet until after, until after we get back, not only on the revenues, but on the capital budget. And part of the concern that I have, and that's if you take a look at the materials that I sent today, particularly the water fund as opposed to the sewer fund as opposed to the water fund. That's $770,000 that previously would have been in the operating budget, not as a separate fund. So it was taken out of it. the sewer department, unlike Westchester Waterworks, is staffed by village people, run by village people, and under the auspices of the village. So by not taking that into account in terms of looking at the cap rate and cap rate increases, I think we are doing our taxpayers a disservice, understanding that the taxpayers are property owners and the water fund is done by the amount of water that is consumed.
So Dan, can I ask you a question on the sewer fund? When we're doing the comparison for the cap, do you know if Jerry and Augie are taking it out of the prior year numbers as well? So it's apples to apples?
I believe I don't remember whether this sewer fund approach was created a year ago or 2 years ago. I can't remember.
Okay,
The answer is, I believe it's apples to apples.
okay,
Every time I've asked the question, the answer is, I don't have to worry about it, it's not in the operating fund, it's a separate fund. And that type of thing bothers me. From a budgeting vantage point, I understand the technical legal issues, that there's nothing wrong with it. But in terms of the effect to the taxpayers, because most of the taxpayers are those who are paying property taxes, as well as the sewer tax. But by saying that we're going to be under 2% and we're raising everything else, we're well over the 2%. And what it really does is it helps push this deficit spending approach to life, if you will, forward, because we're pricing people out of this village, which if that's what we have to do, that's what we're going to do. But, on the one hand, we want to, try and keep a diverse community. And I'm not sure we're going to be, that the trend that we're setting is just on the opposite track, is from where I'm coming from. And if I'm wrong, I would love to know that I'm wrong, and that's fine, and I will retract. The purpose of the raising it is for you all to think about it in terms of where we're going on this. It's not necessarily for a decision either tonight or tomorrow at next week's meeting, but we're not going to be able to meet before, we get through the, most of the budget again. Bill is pulling his hair out.
If thinking about it is a good thing to do, but it almost seems like a problem without a resolution, because we have so many costs that appear to be fixed in terms, particularly of personnel, where we have gotten to the point where those personnel costs are hard to meet, and I'm just not quite sure what the conceivable resolution is of the problem that you're presenting.
Well, there are two ways of handling it. Either you pull back into the operating budget and the revenue into the operating budget. You pull both numbers back in, or you look at it and say, okay, it's not part of it, but for the purposes of how we're going to determine things, we're going to make it part of it, so that we understand that we're not, that we really are trying to stay well within the 2% with all, on a fully loaded basis.
Yeah, I think the way it's being handled now, from my recollection from my government days, is consistent with GASB, which is, the Government Accounting Standard Board, given that we're doing fund accounting. And what you have in the operating budget for the village is interfund transfers. And we have a series of interfund transfers in the current year budget and in 2022. Then in theory, the sewer fund revenue should cover sewer fund costs, including debt service. And the same thing is true with the water fund. Now, where the revenues are reflected, I'm not quite sure. Um, um, When you looked at, if you looked at the budgets that Dan sent around, I don't see, and I didn't see, I may be wrong, I may have missed them, I don't know, because I looked at it quickly. I didn't see a revenue line coming in. Okay, here are the sewer taxes. I'm not sure where that line is reflected. I'm not sure if it's in the operating or it
I
should.
have no idea.
Yeah.
I would assume that it's outside of the operating budget.
It should be with the sewer fund.
Yes, and I assume that there's another page that goes with it for the revenue side.
But then you get to the presentation point, which is all of these things should be, they may be properly, as you say, Dan, handled from an accounting point of view, but in terms of their impact on the taxpayer and so on, it is important to not think of them as sort of sidelines necessarily.
Well, if we go back to our capital recommendations, we did have a note in there about the waterworks saying as much as it's not part of the operating budget, you should keep it in mind.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be amending the document to include the sewer fund.
Yes, and that's one of the changes I think I would make, because I think we mention it in the budget document. I agree, Alan. Thank you for that. Let's see, I mean, blah, blah, blah. No, it's under the cap debt service stuff.
Here in this section.
I can't remember what the tentative budget, if it had the sewer and water fund as part of the tentative budget.
The water fund, I think we've been getting $800,000 to $1 million a year on that. The sewer fund, not you know, I think it was like 660,000 or something like that. But we do have a separate water and sewer fund, and what they're doing is, I think they did a bond for the sewer for 4.5 million a couple of years ago. And what they do is they take the money out of the sewer fund and they pay either the debt or the capital fund, and then that's how it ends up taking care of the expense of the sewer bonds in our operating.
Yeah.
That's
Now,
why it doesn't show any revenue.
Yeah. Now the tentative budget, the last copy I have here, has both they have the general fund, followed by the sewer fund, followed by the water fund, or vice versa.
We have a capital fund and we have a debt fund too.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. Debt service fund. Yeah.
Anyway, it's food for thought. I'm sorry if I.
Yeah, well,
an issue that is perplexing. So just so you know, the revenue for both the sewer and water won't be gets determined when the budget is finished. And say, you go into the joint waterworks and saying, okay, what do we need to set the rate at to meet this expense?
And the Waterworks figures it out and they come back with a percentage increase that either can be accepted or rejected by the trustees.
That's correct.
Yeah. And you look, okay. Let me-
Do we have anything else we need to discuss?
Anyone? Make a motion to adjourn?
I make a
I'll move
motion
to-
to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
I,
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Who's ever doing the screen sharing, you have to
night.
stop the screen sharing for me to stop the Zoom. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Night.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Likewise.